Yeah, look, there's a sense of unease over the current situation, and any talks are very much welcomed here in the United Arab Emirates and indeed across the entire Gulf. We've seen how diplomacy plays a vital role with the numerous conflicts that have we've experienced in this part of the world. So very, very vital leadership from Islamabad. And I've been speaking to officials here in Abu Dhabi today. They're telling me that they're grateful to their counterparts in Islamabad when it comes to these discussions. You know, we see JD Vance leading the US side of the discussions today. We're also seeing, the foreign minister, Iran's foreign minister, and parliament speaker also coming to the table. So that's incredibly welcomed by officials here across the Gulf. And we've also seen, you have to remember, there's a really strong partnership between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. And that is really playing out with regard to these talks. They're playing a really supportive role with regard to supporting Islamabad. They provided fighter jets today to ensure security of those officials flying in and out of Islamabad. So incredibly welcomed here by Dr. Anwar Gargash. I spoke to him a little earlier today. He is, of course, the presidential advisor to the UAE president here, Sheikh Mohammed. So really, really positive developments out of Islamabad today. We hope that some sort of agreement can be reached, and this ceasefire goes on and becomes real groundwork for lasting peace between the US and Iran. And obviously, there is broad concern across the region here. Doha has been very vocal in supporting this call for ceasefire and ensuring that we do indeed see lasting peace. So really united front from Arab leaders in the region with regard to these talks today. And one can only hope after the thousands and thousands of missiles that have been intercepted across the Gulf over the past 5+ weeks, that we can see indeed a lasting peace come to the region. Because you have to remember here, Gulf nations have bore the brunt of that Iranian aggression that we've seen over the past 5-6 weeks. Today is the anniversary since attacks started here on Gulf nations. So a really delicate situation we still find ourselves in, a lot of anxiety here in the Gulf nations with regard to those talks between JD Vance and, of course, the parliamentary speaker from Iran. So we wait to hear more, but for now, it's very much people here, officials here, waiting with bated breath for word on how those talks are developing.
So Pakistan is acting as mediator. How much leverage does Islamabad really have, and how important is backing from Egypt, Turkey, and of course Gulf states to keeping the process alive?
Yeah, as you mentioned there, it's not just Pakistan that's at the table here. By all means, Pakistan is, of course, leading these talks, and of course, given the relationship between Islamabad and Tehran, they are the best people to lead this discussion, these negotiations with regard to lasting peace. But as you mentioned, Egypt and Turkey have played an incredibly important role in these discussions. And getting these talks to this level. There's been serious support from both Ankara and Cairo with regards to supporting Islamabad's efforts to get this over the line, and to get both the spokespeople for the US, as I mentioned, JD Vance, Kushner, all in attendance there today in Islamabad, and to get these talks into some sort of an agreement. And I think it's worth remembering that, when this war started 6 weeks ago, there was one goal and one goal only, and that was to rid Tehran, Iran in general, of the uranium enrichment facilities that it holds. And of course, we saw in that 12-day war, last June of 2025, when hostilities flared up between the US and Iran, we were told that things were in a better state. They had no ability to enrich. Everything had been dismantled. However, less than a year later, we stand here with these talks taking place in Islamabad after 6 weeks of aggression directed at US military bases here in the Gulf, and indeed US Gulf nations for that matter. And unfortunately, we've seen this war, engulf the entire region. Lebanon seeing millions, more than 1 million people displaced with this war, was stretching across the entire region. As I said, Israel and US on one side, Iran and its supporters, Hezbollah, Hamas, and indeed Houthi rebels, all supporting Iran's endeavours. So I think it's incredibly important that we reach some sort of agreement in these talks today, suggesting that they could lead into tomorrow. But for leaders here, for leaders across the region, including Turkey and Egypt and Jordan for that matter, who have also played a critical role in this reaching this position, it's incredibly important.
So you spoke about few points that may be hard to talk about in these negotiations. Now, what are the red lines for the United States, Iran and Gulf states?
Yeah, look, from Iran's perspective, let's start there. Tehran are going into these discussions very much looking for their assets that were seized, obviously in the course of the hostility with the West. They want them to be released. That is number one for them. Number two is they want to keep control of the Strait of Hormuz, which has become an absolute chokehold, not just for countries here in the region, but indeed the entire world. We've seen oil rise to up to $120 a barrel. It has since dropped back since the announcement of this ceasefire. We saw prices of oil drop back to about 95 cents a barrel. So that was a welcome development for nations. But we've seen it across the world now. The ramifications of this 6-week war has had an incredible knock-on effect across all parts of the world, Asia, Europe, and it's heading for America as well. So that's the main points of the Iranian argument. For the US, they want the Strait of Hormuz opened. President Trump has made that very clear in his post on Truth Social over the past week or so in the lead up to the announcement of the ceasefire. We've also seen them looking for uranium to be completely removed, that Iran cannot and will not be able to use any sort of nuclear power against the likes of the US and the economies here, or countries here in the region. So that's another red line for them. So, and we've seen, a 10-point plan put forward by Iran originally that was disagreed to by the United States, by the president, confirmed by Caroline Leavitt, his press secretary. And then we've also seen pushback even today. One of the embassies, the Iranian embassy in South Africa, saying that the US had conceded to the request for their assets to be unfrozen. And we saw quite quickly the White House come back and deny that claim. So there are the two lines from both sides, a lot of different points. 10-point plan was put forward by Iran, as I mentioned, 15-point plan put forward by the US. So a lot of differing points of view. So that's a real concern for here in the Gulf. They wanted the stop of salvos of missiles coming into the Gulf airspace. That's priority number one. And for hostilities to calm down. And then also for the Strait of Hormuz, the major export line for Gulf nations in the region to reopen to all vessels, in particular Gulf vessels here, so that we can get LNG and oil out of the region. So a lot of points at play here. Well, very much the Gulf nations sitting on the sideline, awaiting further information from Islamabad in the hopes that the ceasefire will continue.
Okay, now, what would a successful outcome look like for Gulf states in particular?
Yeah, look, we have lived very much here with Iran on our doorstep. I'm in Dubai. 70 miles from where I stand, joining you now, is the Iranian coastline. We are incredibly close to here in the UAE. And the UAE in particular, you may remember, has witnessed the most amount of missiles, both ballistic and drones sent into its airspace over the past 6 weeks. We saw the last round of interceptions taking place on Wednesday morning, just as President Trump was announcing that ceasefire. So we very much here want to see, from the UAE's perspective, no more aggression towards Gulf states. And that includes obviously the likes of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, all coming under fire. And even quite interestingly, we saw Oman come under fire. And Oman would be seen to be quite friendly with Tehran, but they were not exempt from this Iranian aggression. So that's very much in the minds of many here, which will obviously help the economies here recover from what we've seen over the past 6 weeks. In addition to that, Strait of Hormuz, as I mentioned, incredibly important for all facilitators. And we saw in the last few days, Saudi Arabia's main pipeline that stretches across the country from the Arabian Gulf down towards the Red Sea, that was attacked. That was the last vital, crucial lifeline for Saudi Arabia to get its oil out of the country via the Red Sea and the Suez Canal to Europe and beyond. So a really deeply concerning time for Gulf leaders here. There's a lot of conversation going on between the members of the GCC, as there has been for 6 weeks now. So we wait to see what comes out of these talks, but calls from Doha, Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, across the board, calling for some sort of ceasefire to remain in place. Thankfully, we haven't seen any aggression, any missiles intercepted now in a couple of days, as I mentioned, since the morning of that ceasefire was announced by President Trump. But again, it's very volatile, as we know. Anything could happen with these talks, and deep concern that if this does not come to some sort of an agreement between Washington and Tehran, Gulf nations could indeed see what we've seen over the past 6 weeks ignite again.